Tonight on Reporting Scotland, the harrowing stories of survivors of domestic abuse. They describe how they often feel let down by the justice system. One woman reveals how she recorded an attack on her phone to help gather evidence.
Just leave, I don't want you here, you're scaring me. The thing that was running through my mind over and over and over was, if I don't make it out of this, I have to show people why.
Lauren was left disappointed by the sentence handed out, while others speak of huge delays in their cases coming to court. Also tonight, a court hearing begins listening to accusations of abuse against a former deputy head of Edinburgh Academy spanning 20 years from 1967. The new visa rules coming in today affecting care workers from overseas that could have a devastating impact on staffing in the sector.
And in sport, the Scottish Cup quarter-finals wrap up at Capello. And what next for Aberdeen after Neil Warnock's departure?
Hello, I'm Laura Miller. Welcome to Monday's programme. Nobody was listening. How one domestic abuse survivor summed up her experience of being let down by the justice system. In Lauren's case, she turned to social media to expose her attacker after he avoided a jail sentence following his conviction in the criminal courts. He was admonished after being found guilty, meaning his punishment was a verbal warning not to offend again. Figures obtained by BBC Scotland's disclosure programme show there have been almost 12,500 admonishments given as a sentence for domestic abuse over the last 5 years. Some of the 7 survivors the programme has followed spoke about their lengthy wait for justice. Caroline described it as a sentence in and of itself. COVID lockdowns have created a justice backlog. There are currently more than 27,500 criminal cases waiting to be heard in courts in Scotland. Despite their experiences, all the women have encouraged other victims to report their abusers. Our reporter Katrina McPhee has the story, and a warning: you may find some of the details in her report distressing.
This is Police here. What is your emergency?
My ex-boyfriend found up my flag. He was in here and he started attacking me.
Lauren Hardy was attacked in her flat in Glasgow in 2020. She hid her phone under the bed covers and pressed record.
Just leave, I don't want you here, you're scaring me. The thing that was running through my mind over and over and over was, if I don't make it out of this, I have to show people why.
Lauren is one of 7 women that BBC Disclosure has followed over the past year as they tried to escape domestic abuse and seek justice. Lauren's ex-partner admitted assaulting her, threatening her and damaging property in her flat. He appeared at Glasgow Sheriff Court and was admonished, which is where the sheriff warns a perpetrator not to offend again.
I didn't think he was going to get years of jail time, but I did think that the punishment would fit the crime a little bit more.
Lauren posted the videos online. She received hundreds of messages in response from other survivors.
Having a community of people who knew exactly how I felt, for the first time I think I knew I wasn't alone.
Carolyn Quinn reported her husband to police after being abused for almost 30 years. 2.5 years later, he stood trial at the High Court in Glasgow.
They did say that there was a backlog of cases, but I didn't expect it to be this lengthy. In a way, that's a sentence in itself that I've served for 2 years.
One of the ways that the Scottish courts are trying to improve the justice process is through a new scheme called the Summary Case Management Pilot.
I can think of numerous examples whereby, through case management during the early stages, the accused has accepted guilt and the case is concluded by way of a guilty plea without the case requiring to be listed for trial, which has saved months of waiting for the victim.
Carolyn's case concluded earlier this year when her husband, Kenneth Quinn, was sentenced to 15 years in jail for inflicting severe physical violence and rapes spanning 27 years.
I say to other people, please come forward, please don't suffer in silence. I'm free. I'm free. I was in utter hell for years. At one point I thought I was drowning. But I'm not, I'm here and I'm standing.
Carolyn Quinn ending that report from Katrina McPhee there. And you can watch Disclosure, Surviving Domestic Abuse on BBC One Scotland at 9 o'clock tonight and now on BBC iPlayer. And if you have been affected by the issues in this story, you can find information and support at the number on the screen now or on the BBC Action Line website. A court has heard a former teacher at a prestigious private school in Edinburgh was unpredictable, violent and cruel. 89-year-old John Brownlee is accused of assaulting several boys at Edinburgh Academy over 2 decades, from 1967 to 1987. He's been deemed unfit to stand trial, so a hearing known as an examination of facts in the case has begun at Edinburgh Sheriff Court. Katrina Renton reports.
89-year-old John Brownlee worked at Edinburgh Academy between 1965 and 1996. He was a teacher in what was known as the prep school for children aged around 5 to 12.
The hearing here at Edinburgh Sheriff Court is what is called an examination of facts. John Brownlee is not present as he was found to be medically unfit to stand trial. Sheriff Anderson is hearing the case without a jury present. In total, there are 36 charges against Mr Brownlee. 38 boys, the youngest of them aged 7 years old, claim to have been assaulted by Mr Brownlee between 1967 and 1987. Prosecutors believe that others were also physically attacked by the teacher.
3 complainers gave evidence today about what they said happened to them at school. The first witness, who is now 56, was 11 years old when he started boarding at Edinburgh Academy. He said he lost count of how many times he was hit with a clachan, a wooden bat, by his housemaster, Mr Brownlee. Under cross-examination, the witness accepted that the first incident with the clachan happened as there had been an argument and pushing and shoving. He agreed that corporal punishment was legal at that time. The witness went on to say that he was mistreated by other teachers, including one who attempted to rape him.
The Voice of the UK.
Broadcaster Nicky Campbell has spoken out at the Scottish Child Abuse Inquiry about the abuse he said he suffered at Edinburgh Academy. He said it had a profound effect on his life. He has made allegations of physical violence about Mr Brownlee.
Another witness, a day student at Edinburgh Academy, recalled an incident when he was 10 where he said John Brownlee got him to stand on a gym mat and smashed him over the head with one hand and punched him on the stomach with the other. He said he fell and blacked out. He said he remembered coming round and having real problems breathing. He said, I spotted Mr Brownlee's large brown shoes, and he said, when you can stand up, you can go back to your class, and walked off. A third man told the hearing that John Brownlee was unpredictable, he could be violent, and he was cruel. He said he was beaten by John Brownlee with a clachan around once a week in front of his classmates. He said he was once beaten as he had ink on his fingers. Asked if the beatings were justified in terms of corporal punishment, he replied no. The hearing will continue tomorrow. Katrina Renton reporting Scotland at Edinburgh Sheriff Court.
To some of the day's other stories now. And the driver of a double-decker bus has been charged following a crash with a bridge in West Lothian. The vehicle, understood to be operated by Lothian Buses, hit the railway bridge on Shotts Road near Fauldhouse Station just before 6 o'clock this morning. There were no passengers on board and the bridge was not damaged. 3 people have been arrested after red paint was sprayed across the front of the Scottish Parliament building. This is rigged campaigners were protesting against rising food insecurity. A spokesperson for the Parliament said a similar incident last year by the group cost around £6,000 to clean up. And journalists at STV are set to go on strike after last-minute talks over pay failed to avert industrial action. The National Union of Journalists said STV News faces a summer of disruption to its flagship news programming as journalists are expected to walk out of newsrooms and onto picket lines. NUJ members at the broadcaster will be meeting tomorrow to discuss the form and timescale of industrial action. Now, new immigration rules come into force today, and the social care sector in Scotland is warning they'll have a devastating impact on the industry. The UK government says the measures that mean overseas care workers can no longer bring family members with them are part of plans to radically reduce migration. But care providers say it will hinder recruitment in a sector already in crisis. More than 4,000 care worker visas have been issued in Scotland in the last 2.5 years. Our health correspondent Lisa Summers reports.
They're all highly skilled, but they're also all wonderful people.
Living with motor neuron disease means Brian Murphy needs skilled carers 24 hours a day. His team of 7 carers are all sponsored on foreign worker visas. Without them, he says he'd not be able to live at home. Last year, Brian spent 4 months stuck in an intensive care unit in hospital in Glasgow as a delayed discharge because of a lack of social care provision.
Where would you be without them?
I would either never have got out of ICU or I would be in a care home. And I can't contemplate either of those options. I genuinely I don't think I'd be here.
Afi moved to Scotland from Nigeria with his wife and children. He says care work is a vocation that he loves.
You have to love to take care of somebody, to be able to take care of Brian. You have to be able to understand where he's coming from and what impact your role will play in his life, and it's been really rewarding.
Maybe they're not feeling too great that day.
Around 5% of the workforce at this care provider are from overseas. They say foreign workers play a vital role and warn that the changes will only make recruitment into the sector more challenging.
There's about 70% of unfilled vacancies within Scotland alone, and those vacancies are only going to increase if we continue to limit the workforce that's available to us. And having these restrictions in place, we may see people choose not to come to the UK on those sponsorship programmes.
The UK government says the new rules are part of plans to cut net migration and to tackle abuse of the system.
1, 2, 3.
Being with his wife and children at the end of a challenging shift means the world to Afi. It keeps the job rewarding.
It's very important that families with you when you are doing these kind of jobs. Your mental health is okay, emotional health is okay, your physical being is all right, because at the back of your mind, your family is safe somewhere. And at the end of this job, you can go back to them and see them happy.
Yes. It's actually the sector warns the policy is the wrong direction of travel for an industry in crisis that needs more workers from overseas to fill gaps in social care. Lisa Summers reporting Scotland, Glasgow.
The row between the Conservatives and the SNP over Scottish Government aid to Gaza is deepening tonight. It relates to comments made by the Tory MSP Stephen Kerr, who said Humza Yousaf may have had a conflict of interest in his government backing an aid agency. The First Minister condemned the claims as an outrageous smear. Well, our Westminster correspondent David Porter joins us now. David, just remind us of the background here.
Yeah, this all goes back to the weekend, to Saturday morning, to be precise, when the Daily Telegraph, as part of its lead story, ran a story saying that the Scottish Government had given a donation of £250,000 to the UN UNRWA aid agency in November last year, when the First Minister's parents-in-law were still being trapped in Gaza. Because it was the lead story, it had more prominence, and as part of the fallout of that, the Tory MSP Stephen Kerr suggested, in his words, there may be a conflict of interest. That led to a very strong retort from the First Minister when he said he described it as an outrageous slur.
And what developments have there been today then, David?
Well, very little sign that either side is willing to give up on this. Indeed, both sides are doubling down on it. The deputy leader of the SNP, Keith Brown, told the BBC and BBC Scotland today that he believed the Conservatives should stop Mr Kerr from standing at the Westminster general election. That has been backed up by a senior SNP source, who then also said that he believed that the Tory party was institutionally Islamophobic. That has brought a very strong retort from the Scottish Conservatives this evening. They say that is not the case. They have a zero tolerance of any type of discrimination in any way, and they will robustly defend that. The Conservatives tonight have also said that they will be seeking a ministerial statement in Holyrood as soon as possible as to the funding and decision-making for donations from the Scottish Parliament. At the moment, there is no sign of this row subsiding.
OK, David at Westminster, thank you. Tonight's main news again. And survivors of domestic abuse describe how they often feel let down by the justice system. One woman told how she turned to social media to expose her attacker after he was admonished in court.
And in sport, the Scottish Cup quarter-finals wrap up at Capello. And what next for Aberdeen after Neil Warnock's departure?
Health charities and patients groups say more needs to be done to help Scots living with long COVID. 2 of Scotland's 14 health boards, Fife and Shetland, still aren't offering dedicated treatment and support for the illness, which is estimated to affect around 180,000 people here. The Scottish Government has invested £10 million in a long COVID support fund spread over 3 years. Stephen Gordon reports.
A bit breathless.
The mobility scooter shows how much Crawford Flint's life has changed after a COVID infection turned into long COVID.
Within a couple of months, I couldn't speak. I couldn't walk further than, the car. And so that's 3 years now. The best way I can explain it is I'm 100 times better than I was, and I'm 100 times worse than I used to be.
Beyond an understanding GP, Crawford says he's largely had to help himself, a common complaint among long COVID patients.
When a Holyrood committee began hearing evidence into long COVID last year, fewer than half of Scotland's 14 health boards had dedicated treatment and support pathways in place for patients. That number has now risen to 12 out of 14.
There's not an equality in terms of access to care. It doesn't matter where you live. We should all be able to access care services for long COVID.
I've got no doubt that NHS health boards are trying to make some progress on this. However, I think there are a number of barriers to that. I think part of it will be funding. There was 3-year funding of £10 million announced a few years ago, but we've had no commitment from the Scottish Government so far that that funding will continue in any shape or form.
All the way through life.
Visiting a long COVID service in Ayrshire this morning, the Public Health Minister said the Government is working closely with health boards to ensure provision in every region. There was, though, no commitment on dedicated long COVID funding beyond next year.
We have to become nimble, and I think it's important to recognise that the Scottish Government has invested £19.5 billion into healthcare in Scotland, and that funding is there to support health boards and also third sector organisations to provide the best healthcare we can, and that includes long COVID.
Those struggling want to ensure they're not forgotten.
People have moved on now, and life has returned sort of back to normal. It hasn't returned back to normal for people with long COVID. So I don't know what the answer is, but I know whatever's happening at the moment isn't the answer.
Stephen Gordon reporting Scotland.
Just before we get to the sports desk, cricket's governing body in Scotland has apologised after the publication of an independent report into the treatment of women in the sport. Cricket Scotland's CEO says it's clear that Cricket Scotland allowed behaviours to take place that were disrespectful, demeaning and deeply concerning, and that these were allowed to continue for a significant period. OK, let's get that sport now from Amy, and lots to talk about.
There certainly is. Another managerial departure, Laura, this weekend. Good evening. Aberdeen are looking for a new manager after the departure of Neil Warnock over the weekend. Warnock was expected to remain at the club until the end of the season, but he stepped down after a month in charge. A new manager is expected to be appointed during the upcoming international break, so fans will have to wait a couple of weeks to learn who will be next in the Pittodrie hot seat. Phil McDonald has more.
Neil Warnock's time in charge of Aberdeen was short, but not as sweet as fans may have hoped. His reign lasted just 33 days and ended without a league win. Warnock was able to guide the Dons to the Scottish Cup semi-final, Saturday's 3-1 victory over Kilmarnock securing another trip to Hampden. But Warnock won't be leading the Dons to the National Stadium. Minutes after the full-time whistle, Aberdeen announced that he would be stepping down as interim manager.
I've been telling them now for the last couple of weeks, you've got to push forward now and try and get a new manager as quickly as possible, and that's what they're doing. So I thought it was, the right time. We decided in midweek that today was going to be the day, and I'm glad I left on a high, really.
Warnock's departure leaves Aberdeen searching for their third manager of the season. Interviews are expected to take place this week. An appointment is likely to be made during the upcoming international break. Among the names mentioned as new manager, ex-Celtic boss Neil Lennon was an early favourite. Over the weekend, Northern Ireland manager Michael O'Neill entered the frame. Highly regarded Scots coach Mark Fotheringham, most recently at Huddersfield Town, another potential candidate. Fans are struggling to agree on who should be given the job.
Somebody totally away from Scotland, I think. Same names going round and round.
Somebody away from the usual pool, the usual suspects.
Yeah.
Probably Neil Lennon, because he's got a big name, and I believe he's been approached and he hasn't said no.
Mourinho would be okay. It's always a chance anyway.
Collector's item these,
Neil Warnock leaves Aberdeen sitting 10th in the Scottish Premiership. He described his spell in charge as an experience, something Dons fans will certainly agree with. Phil MacDonald, reporting Scotland, Aberdeen.
Hibs winger Martin Boyle is back home from hospital after he sustained a concussion in his side's Scottish Cup quarter-final defeat by Rangers. Boyle was taken off on a stretcher after falling awkwardly while challenging for a high ball with John Souttar during the first half. The winger was admitted to hospital and tests revealed he has concussion, but manager Nick Montgomery admitted he was relieved as there were fears it could have been worse for one of his star players.
Yeah, I didn't really see the incident till afterwards, but it's a heavy fall and sort of landed on his head, and there's always a risk that could have a neck injury. But the fact that that's been cleared last night is really fortunate for us and Martin. And we just hope he recovers quickly. But yeah, he'll be out of the game on Wednesday for sure. I keep saying it every week. The next game's the most important, and yeah, it's a really important game for us on Wednesday night, as it is for them. Everybody's fighting for points this time of the year for different reasons. For us, yeah, we just have to focus on ourselves.
The quarter-finals of the Scottish Cup conclude this evening with the only non-Premiership side of the round, Greenock Morton, welcoming Hearts to Capello. One of the two will join Celtic, Rangers and Aberdeen in the draw for the semis, which will be made after the game. The draw for the last four of the Women's Scottish Cup will also take place during tonight's coverage, led by Jonathan Sutherland, who is there for us.
If you're looking for a cup upset, we could be in the right place this evening. Greenock Morton aiming to get to the semi-finals of the Scottish Cup for the first time since 1981. They disposed of Premiership side Motherwell in the previous round, and they had been in a fantastic run of form. 16 matches unbeaten, no less, but unfortunately for them, they haven't won in their last three. In fact, haven't even scored a goal. So perhaps not the best time to be taking on Heart of Midlothian, who pretty much have third place in the Premiership already sewn up. Of course, last weekend as well, Hearts 2-0 winners against Celtic. And in Lawrence Shankland, their captain, they've got a striker who's scored 28 goals already this season for club and country. So Hearts go into this as big favourites. Join us for Sports Scene tonight. We'll also have the semi-final draws for the men's and women's Scottish Cup. You can watch us on the BBC Scotland channel at 7:30 on BBC Sport website as well, and on the BBC Sport app.
Jonathan Sutherland there. Well, to rugby in Scotland's Hugh Jones says the side have got to react quickly after a shock defeat to Italy in their Six Nations match in Rome. Despite a 31-29 defeat, Scotland can still win the title, but would require a heavy victory over Ireland this weekend. Today, Glasgow Warriors trio Ali Miller, Alex Samuel and Max Williamson have joined the Scotland camp, replacing Glenn Young, Hamish Watson and Jamie Batty.
This is really disappointing. We wanted to come here and get a win and then go to Dublin next week sort of full of confidence and try and do something. But yeah, this obviously takes the wind out of the sails a bit. we've got to react. We've got to react quickly, recover well, and start training next week and prepare for another game.
And just a quick bit of tennis news for you, Laura. Cameron Norrie, it's currently 3-3 between him and Gael Monfils in the third round at Indian Wells.
Good stuff. Lots happening. Thanks, Amy. OK, now let's go over to Laura McKeever to find out what's happening on the BBC Scotland channel in just a few minutes.
Tonight, as BBC Disclosure looks into domestic abuse and the justice system, we're joined by a charity which supports people through the court system. From today, new rules mean carers coming to work in the UK won't be able to bring family members with them, so we'll have reaction from the sector here. And also a sweep-up from last night's Oscars. We'll see you at 7.
And just before we go to the weather, meet Tato, the Samoyed, who's bounced back from a rare type of cancer to scoop a prize at Crufts. Tato's tumour was discovered last year and she underwent life-saving surgery in January. She picked up the Good Citizen Prize along with her 13-year-old handler, Dermot Sim from Edinburgh, at the National Dog Show this weekend. And if that doesn't warm your heart, nothing will. The weather
won't. Exactly. Yeah. Pinky, whatever it's called. Here we are. We've got the Bassrock there in the background, and look at the twin sister in the west with the Ailsa Craig there, still grey skies as well. But we do start to cut off that cold, cloudy, easterly flow we've been living with over the last week or so, and our weather becomes more active as weather fronts start to come our way, along with strengthening winds, meaning some rain in the forecast too. With low pressure close by, combined with the highest tides of the year, there are a number of flood warnings in force, 7 to be exact, for northern Scotland. So keep your eyes on the SEPA website if that's something that concerns you. Now, as far as tonight's concerned, here's one of those fronts lying across western Scotland. That will continue to make its way north as we head through the overnight period, becoming confined to Shetland, drier for a time before the next front starts to move into the south as well, bringing more rain. Temperatures settling generally at around 4 or 5 Celsius. Into tomorrow, it's a mainly dry, cloudy start away from the southwest and Shetland. The rain will continue to plague southwestern parts, initially be heavy and persistent. As that front works its way northwards and eastwards, it'll break up into bits and pieces of intermittent rain, really. And the rain clearing from Shetland as we head through the course of the day. Still quite a keen southeasterly wind here. The possibility of something brighter for Orkney, Caithness around the Inverness area, northern Aberdeenshire. Still a lot of frontal cloud elsewhere, the odd spot of rain or drizzle coming out of it. A cold feel in the east despite the double figures here. We might see something brighter come the afternoon for the southwest. It will be pretty limited, but it will be drier. Up the west coast, we hang on to a lot of clouds, some showery rain as well, and the first signs of wind starting to pick up here ahead of the front that's going to move in tomorrow evening. So it will start off fairly quiet as we head through to the start of the evening, before we see a band of really heavy and persistent rain sweeping and accompanied by strengthening southerly winds. So a wet and windy start to Wednesday. Now, the rain does clear away, leaving a legacy of cloud across the south. It brightens up north of the central belt. We'll see gale force winds from the northwest and the west, and temperatures getting a bit milder, and it brightens up as well with blustery showers. That's your forecast.
Judith. And that is Reporting Scotland. The late news is at 10:30. Until then, enjoy your evening. Bye for now.